Lincoln said, I was always naturally against slavery. And that's true. He grew up in a very unusual family of poor whites that belonged to a primitive Baptist sect that was what was called Emancipationist in Kentucky. His family fled Kentucky. Lincoln said, poor white people flee from slave states. They don't go to slave states. When he was in the Congress, his only bill of significance was for emancipation in the District of Columbia. It was a compromise bill. There have been a number of bills that have been knocked down. He proposed a bill that he worked out with the leading abolitionists in the House, particularly Joshua Giddings, who was the abolitionist champion of the House, who always backed Lincoln in every campaign after that. When Lincoln delivers his first speech against the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854 before the House of Representatives in the Illinois legislature, he says, perhaps dozens of times, the phrase, slavery is wrong. Lincoln says, if slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. So was Lincoln a woke progressive of the 21st century? No. But was he somebody who was a, quote, white supremacist? Was he never serious about slavery? That is a gross distortion of who he was and what he accomplished. One other thing about the Emancipation Proclamation that is often misunderstood and misrepresented is that he has a debate with, it's not in this book, it'll be in the subsequent one, with Horace Greeley, who's the erratic, very erratic, always erratic, histrionic, anti-slavery editor of the New York Tribune. And Greeley urges him to immediately emancipate the slaves. And Lincoln famously replies, if I could save the Union without emancipating the slave, freeing the slaves, I would. If I free the slaves, save the Union, I would. He had already decided on the Emancipation Proclamation, but kept it secret. He had initially kept it secret from his entire cabinet. He was setting up public opinion to accept what he was doing, that this was essential and they had to accept it in order to save the Union, knowing that it would be largely unpopular. The Illinois abolitionists always stood by Lincoln and understood him. So it's an important distinction. Later when he's president, among many, many things that he does, is that there are various appointments that he has. And there are even positions like, ambassador to the International Anti-Slave Trade Convention. And he always appoints the old abolitionists. And he says at one of his meetings with them, I really like to do this. Garrison, William Lloyd Garrison, who is, the ultimate radical of abolitionism, believes that the Constitution's pact with the devil, burns it at a meeting, doesn't believe in politics at all, believes only in moral shaming, believes in immediatism, which means immediate emancipation, doesn't believe in anti-slavery politics, which develops in part as a reaction to Garrison. By Lincoln's second term, Garrison's come around. And he meets with Lincoln in the White House. And he thinks that some of his old colleagues who denounced Lincoln, even after the Emancipation Proclamation, are just completely counterproductive and posturing for its own sake.
Yep.
And possibly damaging the entire cause. There is a statement that Lincoln makes later to a mass rally. He sends a letter, and he says, I understand you don't like my views of blacks. I understand you don't approve of the Emancipation Proclamation. I understand that you don't approve of blacks being in the Union Army. Well, too bad. And I did it because I thought it was right, and you ought to support it if you're for the Union. But more than that, he says to them, let me explain something to you. Blacks have their own motives. If they've been freed, and they ought to have been, and they are fighting for you, then they're owed something too. And he talks about their bravery and courage and says there are some white men with malignant heart That's Lincoln's phrase, malignant heart, who would oppose them and getting their full freedom. Now, by that time, he had already come to the idea that blacks should be granted citizenship, and had privately told the governor of Louisiana, which was then occupied by the Union, that he ought to begin to propose that in stages. And then, of course, that's Lincoln's last speech on April 11th, 1865, which he says there should be citizenship for the very intelligent and those who have served in the military. It's his wedge to break it in. And if, Lincoln was for white supremacy and racism, there was somebody who was unconvinced in that crowd at that speech who heard it, and that was John Wilkes Booth.